Hi everyone. I'm so excited to be joined by Lyndall Clipstone for this recent Lovers Way interview to celebrate the upcoming release of FORESTFALL, which is the sequel to the YA Gothic Lakesedge. Very exciting. Um, so we're going to try and keep this spoiler free as much as we can. So Lyndall, can you tell us a little bit about Lakesedge and how it leads into FORESTFALL?
So, Lakesedge is the story of a girl who goes to stay at Haunted Estate with a boy known as the Monster of Lakesedge. And when she falls in love with him and discovers that he's cursed, she decides to make a bargain with the Lord of the Dead to save him. So, Forestfall explores, I guess, the fallout of that decision.
Amazing. That was so simple, clean. I love it, but it's still, I was like, you're ticking all these boxes for me.
I
It's brilliant.
I've got a very well rehearsed elevator pitch. It was like the best thing I ever did as an author was to come up with like a pitch because it's been very good.
Oh, that's so good. That's amazing. Thank you for that. And of it, like Forestfall rounds out the series. Like it's a duology. Was it always
Yeah.
going to be a duology when you set out to write Lakesedge?
So I always sort of, when I was drafting it, I kind of at first envisioned if I did write a second story, like where the story would go. But then when I was querying it and even submitting it to publishers with my agent, I kind of sort of shopped it as like a standalone with series potential. And when my American publisher bought the book, they bought a two-book contract, which was very lovely. But nobody really asked me what the second book was supposed to be about. And so I just sort of assumed that it would be like a second standalone because that's what had happened to like an author friend of mine who'd recently sold two books. And then when I asked my editor if she'd like to see a pitch for my other book, she's like, "Oh, we were thinking you might turn Lakesedge into a series." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So at first I panicked. But then the more I thought about it, the more it actually felt right to spread it out into two books because there was a few things that I'd wanted to explore in Lakesedge that I couldn't quite fit, like more about Rowan's younger brother and the relationship between Letter and the Lord Under, and more of Arian's sort of character development. So all of that, there was probably just not enough room and time to go through all of that in one book. But having two books really opened things up. So it was really good to know. I think I was at like early sort of stage of editing Lakesedge when I found out. So it helped me sort of unlock a lot of things that I've been feeling a little bit sort of stuck on or unsure about. And yeah, it really clicked into place. So I didn't sort of originally envisage it as a duology, but I'm really glad that it worked out like that. And it definitely feels right for the story.
Absolutely. And you're so right because it does feel like this brand new story, like this new chapter in the characters' lives, but there's so much familiarity around it that it's still one story, which is really fantastic. I would love more, just saying. Spin-off
I know
potential.
I had somebody reading like Forest Fall and they messaged me to say like I think we need a Lord Under novella and I'm like, well that would be fun. I'd really love to do a graphic novel. So like Becky Cloonan,
Perfect.
please come and do the art for me. Like that would be really fun. One day maybe. Or a
Yeah.
Netflix series. Everyone always asks about that. They're like, do you think there'll be a Netflix series? And I'm like, well, probably not, but I won't say no because that would be really
We
fun.
can dream, and I
Dream.
could
But I do think
definitely.
I will. Oh, sorry. I was
No,
going to
no,
say,
no.
I do think I'll I do think I'll probably come back to it one day and maybe write like an epilogue or something when I've had a little bit of time
Yeah.
away from the books. I think it would be nice to revisit it.
Absolutely. And something visual would be so good because the world below, like this whole new world that we go into is so lush. And it was definitely my favorite part of this book. Like I loved spending time in there so much. And it was so different to anything else that I've read. I think because with the gothic genre it could go a little bit darker, and I loved that. Did you have a particular process for creating this like whole other world and those the different gods and rules that that world has?
So I was actually inspired a little bit by Neil Gaiman's American Gods. was watching the TV series and then I read the book around the time that I was sort of conceptualizing what I wanted to do with Forestfall. And I really love this idea about like the gods needing people to believe in them to keep their strength and how they all sort of like had these different personalities. And so I kind of, that was one inspiration. And then also, I think my partner was playing through Dark Souls 3 at the time, and there was a few sort of like some of the characters in that and the mythology in that was also a big inspiration. So yeah, I think I guess logistically I needed more characters too, because otherwise it would have just been Letter and the Lord Under. And so I was like, what could possibly be, like the story arc for all of them to have to work out. So that was the introduction of the other gods was a really fun extra bit.
Definitely. And it was a lot more fantasy than the first one. Was that something that you had expected to go into? Have you always loved that fantasy element? I mean, the Gothic does have some supernatural elements to it anyway, but
Um, I'm really not sure. I think Lakesedge probably was a lot more fantasy in earlier versions when there was a lot of focus on mending the corruption. Like in earlier drafts, that had been like a world, we have to save the world kind of problem. And then as I revised, I sort of narrowed it down to become like a more personal threat. And so I think drawing it in made it a lot more gothic focused because everything was kind of very based in the house and feeling very claustrophobic. So I don't know. I think Forest was probably definitely more of like a spooky woods fantasy versus gothic fantasy or like
definitely.
gothic woods. I don't know, but yeah, like in terms of the fantasy side of things, I'm not sure. It just kind of came out that way, but it was really enjoyable to play with those sort of elements, particularly like the way that like the magic sort of worked between everybody and Rowan and Letta's connection and how she sort of experienced using her power and things like that.
Yeah, no, it definitely fit really well. So such a spooky vibe. I really loved it. And of course, we also see much more of the real world. And I loved that we got to see so much through Rowan's point of view. What was it like writing from his perspective?
It was really fun, actually. Like, I kind of by necessity needed to give him a voice on the page because I really wanted it to be their story. And because the Lord Under is such a strong presence in the whole narrative, I felt like I needed to give him the opportunity to kind of like have his own weight in the book rather than I don't know, because there was sort of yeah. So that was really fun, just like getting to discover his voice. And I think it really came quite easily to me more than I'd expected. He had always sort of felt like a very strong character that I had like a good idea of. So when I started drafting his chapters, I was like, oh, okay, here it is. Like
Yeah.
it always felt quite distinctive. And it was a really fun challenge because I hadn't ever written like a dual point of view novel before.
Yeah.
So logistically it was really fun, like working out like who got what chapter and where to sort of cut between them and things like that.
Yeah. And I think it was a really good balance and it was done really well. And through both parts, both perspectives, we did get to see so much of the story develop, but they still cross paths so much, which I loved. The romance, just in case anyone was wondering, I know you all were. It's just to fire it up a few notches. So I absolutely loved it. And again, I loved seeing a lot more of the Lord Under. Did his character change? He's when you wrote him much more closely in Forestfall? Or did you pretty much stay the same in your
Um,
head?
so he's probably the trickiest character for me to write, mostly because I wanted to sort of strike a balance between keeping him as like an otherworldly being, but also making him like giving him enough depth to add sort of interest to their relationship, but without like my editor and my agent were always like, stop making him too nice, stop making him too human. Like that, why are they bickering with each other? She should be more afraid of him. And so I think that was a challenge, like a way to sort of give him depth without making him too humanized, because that wasn't what I wanted for the character. Although there are books where like that is kind of the twist on like, the
Hmm.
death god or like the like the Fae prince becoming very humanized, but I didn't want that for him just because it didn't really fit with his character. So trying to walk the line between keeping him as like this remote kind of old, like eternal kind of creature, plus giving him enough depth to make his story kind of interesting. So yeah, it was a fun challenge.
Yeah, and I think you did it really well. From memory, there might have been a few moments where, yeah, they were connecting on what seems like a human level, and then something would happen, or the Lord Under would do something. You're like, oh, that's right. He's like this ethereal
Yeah,
being. Like, it's so different. So, yeah, I think you did that
those
really.
are really fun moments, and like just the sort of the constant, like I really love the power dynamic between them, like how Letta just wants to constantly be like fighting so hard just to meet him on like an even, like, or just to try and keep up with him. And so he's got so much power, but she's using everything she's got to try and counteract that. It was a really fun dynamic to write.
Oh, I could imagine, and to read because her character was so feisty, in like even more so in Forestfall, and it was so great to see her. It kept me guessing because obviously she's human, and then she's in this totally other world, and maybe she isn't, and I just didn't know how it was going to end. So I really loved all those elements, and yeah, seeing her character develop was fantastic. It's
It's
really
really
enjoyable.
good. Yeah, I felt like I really was happy with how her arc went because I had a lot of things that I wanted and didn't want for her story. And I sort of vaguely knew where I wanted her to end up at the end, but there was a lot of questions about like how she would get there and what she'd have to give up to get what she wanted or to get to the end. And yeah, so it was, I think it's hard not to spoil it, but I feel happy and kind of like it was I wanted like a bittersweet but satisfying kind of ending, I think, and I feel like that was the conclusion that she got with all of them, or I got
Yeah,
for all of them. So yeah,
I
I think Rowan's ending
agree.
made me more emotional than hers did, but I loved like both of their endings together.
No, I agree. They ended up in such a great place, but obviously they are both kind of changed because that's just what happens in YA books. So I think it was
Yeah.
perfect. Absolutely. So now that this series is finished, what's next for you?
So I'm working on a new book, which is the standalone dark fantasy gothic romance type thing. It's set in a completely separate world to Lakesedge, so it's new world, new characters, new everything. Um, but I can't really, so hopefully I will be able to reveal more about that sometime soon. But yeah, it's been a lovely distraction from stressing about FORESTFALL's release, and also it's kind of nice to be spending time in a new world after spending so many years working on my other series.
Yes, I'm so excited. And just from what you described, I know it'll be amazing because it's totally in your vibe. What you're so good at. So I'm very excited to hear more about that for sure. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Lyndall. This has been so amazing.
Thank you
Forestfall
for having
is
me.
released in Australia next week on the 30th. So you still have a whole week to pick up Lakesedge. If you have not already, you have plenty of time to read it before diving into
They look
Forest.
really nice next to each other too. I should have grabbed Lakesedge as well, but like you
That's
can just because they look so pretty together, that's like the best reason to
they
buy them.
have shelf value. What more could you want?
Definitely.